Welcome to STEM Stories with Mr. Ewing. This is part 2 on our series about our brain, and we're going to talk about myelination and the amygdala hijack. Now, those two words, well, actually, it's 3 words, but the myelination and the amygdala, it sounds super complicated, but I'm going to break it all down for you. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is what's going on inside our brain. Now, inside our brain, there are a lot of nerve endings, nerve cells. There's just all kinds of neurotransmitters. There's all kinds of stuff going on. It's how our brain works. Super complicated, but we're going to break it down. Now, we're going to talk about something super important, and that's myelin. Now, myelin is something that we all have. It's created in our brain. We don't even know we're doing it, but as we start to learn things, we actually create myelin. Now, myelin, simple way to think about it is myelin equals learning. As we learn things, like I said, we are creating myelin inside of our brain around the nerve ending. So here is basically a nerve cell with our neuron in the center and our axon and our dendrils, which are those little tree-like pieces. Now, in a cell that hasn't created myelin, it's kind of all over the place. And actually, myelin actually helps calm it down and insulate it. Now, as we learn something, we actually create myelin. And it wraps itself onto the nerve and in the nerve cells and actually creates something called a myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is actually that piece that we learn, and that's what actually helps keep control of the things that are going on in our brain. So it's super important that we're learning because we're creating those myelin sheaths. And without those myelin sheaths, it's kind of all over the place and crazy. Now, think about it this way. Have you ever been in your yard or seen on the news or on a show where someone's got a hose and they're using it to water something? Well, they put it down and all of a sudden the hose just starts flapping crazy all over the place, right? All right, so the first thing you want to do is get that hose under control. Well, think about myelin as a fireman, holding that hose tight and controlled so that hose is being used properly and that water actually is going in the correct direction. So myelin is sort of like a fireman, and that water in the hose, that information or those things that you want to transmit to different parts of your body. So that's why myelin is super important, because we need firemen. Now, another important part of our brain on top of the myelin is an area called the amygdala. The amygdala is way down there at the base, sort of in the center, and it's this tiny little thing in the brain. Well, you would think, oh, it's so small, it's not super important, we don't have to worry about it. Well, we kind of do, because all information that goes into our brain passes through the amygdala. The only piece of information that does not go through the amygdala is our sense of smell. That goes straight to our frontal lobe. Now, I don't know the answer to that. This would be a great time to pause and find out why the smell not pass through the amygdala when speech, eye, touch, all that does. Now, the amygdala is really important because it actually serves twofold. It processes our information and sends it where it needs to go, but also the amygdala, when we are in a crisis, think fear, it also actually protects us. Now, what is happening is once it goes into the amygdala, like I said, it will send things up to the frontal, prefrontal lobe. But the amygdala also, if we are scared or angry or something, does something very important. It actually protects us. Now, you may have heard the saying, freeze, flight, or fight. Well, when the amygdala senses danger, you're either going to freeze, you're going to flight, which means you're going to take off, or you're going to fight back. That's what gets us into kind of challenges in our life. Now, the amygdala protects us, withdrawals, actually helps us feel pleasure, but also can put that sense of fear in us. It's first very small thing. It does a lot of controlling on our body. And if you think about this at school, if you're ever in that position where you feel like you can't do something, or you see that person that gets under your nerves or gets us tense, or maybe sometimes just walking into school, that amygdala may put you in to the freeze, flight, or fright position and get our brain not working. That's actually what we call the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is hijacked by those emotions, puts us in fight, flight, or freeze, and there's no getting out of it. Now, it's super important if you understand the amygdala hijack. It isn't something that you can actually control. Your brain already knows how to do this. It's actually learned. Remember we learned earlier about that thing called myelin? Well, myelin actually is something that we've learned. So if we've learned to go into the freeze, flight, or fight zone, we've told the amygdala what to do. We've already hijacked it. So once you're in the amygdala hijack, you can't control it. Your brain is doing something that you can't control how to do it because we've already told it through the myelin what to do. So we need to start to understand that if we're in that mode of amygdala hijack, we need to take a deep breath. We need to take a walk. We need to stop until we can get our amygdala back to where it needs to be. And sometimes when you go into amygdala hijack, your teacher might go into amygdala hijack too. And then there's two people that are in fight, flight, or freeze mode. I know as a teacher, this was huge for me to learn, that sometimes even I go into amygdala hijack. So if you get into that space, what should you do? If your first reaction, if your brain's telling you to fight, flight, run off, or freeze, what do we need to learn to tell ourselves to do? Now, what would you do in that case? What was something that you think that you could do? I know there are things that I know I could do. So, what does this all mean for you or me? Well, knowing that learning creates myelin, which is super important. And even if we take long to learn something, we are still slowly building that myelin. It's sort of like going to practice a sport for the first time. You have no clue how to do something. Like if I went to go play lacrosse, I wouldn't know what to do because I've never played lacrosse. I wouldn't know how to hold a stick. I wouldn't know how to do anything on the field except probably run. I'd probably go into amygdala hijack and get off that field. But as I'm learning how to play that sport of lacrosse, I'm building up myelin. And as I build more and more myelin wrapping around those neurons, that myelin sheath, I'm actually putting learning into my brain. When it comes to the amygdala hijack, the first thing you need to know is it's okay. It's not something that you can control yet, because we can learn steps to change how the amygdala reacts and keep it from going into hijack by starting to learn our patterns. So when the amygdala is in hijack, we need to step back, and then we need to develop some myelin around our amygdala and how it does react to keep it out of amygdala hijack. So why do we lose control of our emotions? What do you think is actually controlling that? What would you get? What did we just learn? It's the amygdala. That pesky little monster in our brain is taking control. And you need to figure out how to take control back. And you can do it. We can do it. It's all things we can do. So to keep from going into fight, freeze, or flight, what are we going to do? What's one or two things right now you can think of if we're going into those modes that we can do? I know what I would do, but what works for me may not work for you. And remember, That myelin sheath is that fireman. We want that fireman taking control and helping us learn and learn more. That fireman and our myelin, super important to our learning. I hope you enjoyed our second step in understanding our own brains, and I hope that you're starting to learn some things that you have control of. We don't sit around and say, oh, that's just the way my brain is. Well, it might be the way your brain is now, but know that you have the power to actually learn more, create more myelin, and figure out how to keep from that amygdala hijack.